It's the NFL playoffs. I can't believe it. Didn't the season just start last week? I'm here with Ron. We will not bore you with 5 minutes of begging for likes and subscriptions and sales and tell you about the weather in Zimbabwe or any of that nonsense. Let's just get right into it. How you doing, Ron?
I'm doing pretty good, I would say, based on Week 18 results. A lot of good writing. It's something that we talked about when Week 13 or Week 14. I said I would do it once. I would talk about how Week 18 shapes up in my mind. And I couldn't ask for a better script. So I have zero complaints right now.
Zero complaints from the season?
Well, from Week 18, zero complaints.
Wow.
If I left one thing on the table, it would have been Carolina, but everything else worked out exactly right. From the first quarter to the pivots, everything was well thought out. I think the point here is to have a game plan before you start. If this happens, do this. For example, Josh Allen played one play with Buffalo. I expected him to play one series, and I had to move pretty quickly. And I got closed out, I don't know how many times from making a first quarter play, but I needed to have New England at that particular time. So I ended up with multiple plays on New England at the time, but I was prepared for every pivot. We talked about Stroud, or at least I did, about how much confidence he needed to go into the playoffs with. And he played and led them to a nice early lead, and everything kind of worked out. I think the importance, Chris, is that you have to have a game plan for Week 18 like no other week in the NFL.
Well, one of the things that I like to do on the high variance weeks are the money line parlays, and Carolina and somebody else were huge dogs that won, which was nice. And it could have became a monster week with the. I just experiment that with them on small 5-team by 2s, 3s, and 4s. And you'd be shocked at how much they can pay. Because I figured the Bears could beat Green Bay and Carolina could beat Atlanta. I was going to have an aneurysm if New Orleans had won, because that was the one team I said had no chance.
Me too.
If that had come in, that would have cracked me. But.
Yeah, that's the only surprise I would have to Week 18, because everything else played out perfectly. I had no interest in the New Orleans-Tampa Bay game. Normally, you take all those points with must-win, must-lose type teams, but I really thought New Orleans wasn't going to come to play, so I ignored the game completely.
Well, I'm having a little bit of a pity party, but I didn't tell you this, but if the season had ended just a couple of weeks ago, I would have collected $418,755. I would have cashed 5 different prizes, and things were actually looking like they could get better because I could improve and make even more money. So. But unfortunately, that was the time period that the model decided to go south on me and wasn't helpful. And all those good beats that I was getting turned into bad beats and resulted in me getting a big goose egg for the year. So a little bit of disappointment that I didn't cash something, considering I only had a couple weeks to go and I was looking so good.
I knew you were close. I do a lot of good analytical investigative work, and I was hoping Pittsburgh would lose by 1 instead of 2 for you, but because I kind of knew what positions you were in at that particular time, and it was a great middle for me, and it was a terrible line in the contest, I think.
Yeah, I had to use Pittsburgh, and it was the perfect game. It's exactly the game I wanted, because I knew everybody else was going to be on Cincinnati, and I wasn't having to go on the other side just for the sake of going on the other side. I liked Pittsburgh. And it was no consolation that I had 30 teasers and parlays that all moved forward, because I would have rather to lose that by one, half a point was very annoying. But it is what it is. I mean, when you have rookie head coaches like Tomlin and rookie quarterbacks like Wilson, you can't expect them to know what to do at the end of the game. So that was a bad choice on my part, expecting them to know what to do at game end.
Well, I know we all get critical of this, that, or the other, but I thought Cincinnati would win, but I certainly thought Pittsburgh had some good Week 18 factors as well. So I projected that as a really too close game to call. Was lucky enough to have both sides in that one. I want to pivot just for a second, although we could talk about middles because there were a lot of good middles last week. But a lot of people raised points about incentives. Geno Smith need $2 million for this, and Evans needed this and this and this. The marketplace tends to price them correctly. If you bet Evans Week 18 receiving yards, you actually lost. If you bet some of these other guys, you might have actually lost instead of won, or they wouldn't be on there. An unsung thing is still milestones. And I wrote about this, sent it to you, Cris, sent it to a few other people at various times in the week. Milestones get hidden and they're still undervalued in the market. And it's not something I'm going to talk about before Week 18 next year, but I'll talk about it now. When somebody has 9.5 or 9 sacks and they want to get to 10, or somebody has 952 yards, they go for it. And 6 out of the 7 guys who needed a half a sack or 1 sack to get to 10 made it. Of all people, Myles Garrett didn't make his incentive as trying to lead the league in sacks, which he didn't do, but Trey Hendrickson did, so that cashed. Jonathan Cooper, Micah Parsons, all these other ones cashed. And I was saying, wow, why didn't I have more on this? This is something I've really got to keep in my head. Milestones matter even more than incentives, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I'll tell you what really bothered me, it was a nuisance actually, is a couple of the apps actually, as soon as you open them up, had a list of all the players with incentives, and you had to scroll past this crap. And it's like, are you kidding me? If they're going to prepackage all of these incentives, and every time you log into the account, it's going to boom right in your face. It's like, I don't think I really want to be on this page. One way or another, I don't want to be on this page if they're force feeding it down my throat.
Yeah. So there were 2 games last week where I thought the handicapping had nothing to do with Week 18. One of them was Indianapolis and Jacksonville. Given the state of those 2 teams and incomplete rosters and 70% pass defenses and so on, it didn't matter to me whether they were playing Week 1, Week 18 in Jamaica or whatever. You give me more than 3 points and I'm going to take it. And that was the handicap. It was a relatively simple handicap to make on that game, but the stat sheet lined up. There were no situations going on other than the fact that you take the dog over 3. And then the other one was the Detroit-Minnesota game, which was winner take all to get the coveted bye. Detroit needed the bye in the worst way, probably Minnesota as well. And that game was handicapped like a regular game. And we talked about it last week. We both favored Detroit. I made the line kind of a hard 3 minus 120, 3.5 minus 105. I was a little surprised that you could get 2.5 for much of the week, if not all of the week until Monday, or I think until Sunday night. So I thought those 2 were regular handicaps. I don't know your opinion on that.
Yeah, I actually never worried about the Lions winning that game. And I was disappointed because I was playing both sides of that game, and Minnesota just couldn't cover a teaser. So I expected a closer game. But I suppose I shouldn't have as much because I pretty much knew there was no way the Lions were going to lose that game. They were going to go to the ends of the earth to make sure they got that bye week. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in terms of how they're managing Sam Darnold in Minnesota, I think they're doing the correct thing by keeping him out of trouble in the red zone. And I like that philosophy most of the time. But when you're playing a high-scoring team like the Lions, you're just going to have to take chances. And I don't think they took enough chances in the red zone, even settling for a field goal or two. And then on downs, playing not for Darnold to pass it, but to run the ball. I thought they were considering the opponent a little too conservative against the Lions because you knew you had to score points in that game. And the Lion game was important to me because I didn't get as much as I wanted on Arizona. Arizona was by far the play I liked the best last week, forgetting about all the first quarter, second quarter, third and fourth quarters that I shared with you offline and stuff. It's just that San Francisco was in such an unbelievably poor position. Short week, nothing to play for. They didn't know what to do. Their quarterback was out. I needed one more ticket on Arizona than I had, and I was able to put the money line parlay at plus 145 in on Arizona and tying it to Detroit. Luckily, that Detroit game was after that game because I just needed more money on Arizona, and that worked out. So Detroit came in handy, but San Francisco was just in a terrible position last week. You want to talk about the Rams? Because they made the decision, as I suspected 5 weeks earlier, that they weren't going to play anybody. And I got a little bit of cold feet because I had so much money on Seattle. And then I was able to middle the game with the Rams because the Rams became crazy dogs. There's overcompensation there. But, the Rams are an interesting team. How do you feel in retrospect about how they approached that game?
I'm shocked that they didn't make more of an effort because I think they would have benefited from not having to play Minnesota the first round. But that's my take out of it. I just expected them to try, and they didn't. So, they did, but they could have tried harder.
Yeah, we know Seattle is an incomplete team, but they're better than the Rams subs. It's not like a New York Giant Philly situation where I believe Philly's second string, because of how the roster is built with Howie Rosen, is better than the New York Giants first string, especially with Drew Lock at quarterback. So I had no problems taking a line that should have been 17 at full strength and taking Philly -2. But the Rams, they have some interesting defensive pieces. They let Tyler Higbee play, which was a good move. Also, Dallas Goedert played for Philly his first time back, which was a good move. Each of those guys played about a half a game, so that was good. And Jimmy G did well. So, especially not playing for a year and throwing for 300
he threw a lot
yards.
of bad passes. He did.
But, these supplemental wide receivers were open for 300 yards.
I'm not so sure Detroit gifted McVay a game plan. I think did Detroit do anything that wasn't expected?
I think Detroit is one of those teams. There's some college teams that fit this bill. Is like game plan. They don't care about that stuff. Here's what we're going to do. You try to stop us. So if anything, I would look back and say, what did Detroit do defensively that the Rams can learn from? But I don't think there was anything different that Detroit did offensively. But defensively, maybe you could say, look at, there's 2 or 3 teams. I've looked back. You probably look back because you do your trailing 5 weeks. If you look at the Lions, their pass defense has suddenly hit Super Bowl status. And it just seems like they give up a lot of points, but maybe it's the aggressive offense that contributes to points that they're allowing defensively, because defensively, I've noticed a change in the way the Lions are defending the pass.
Well, as I pointed out, and I think I saw that you're a believer now, when that Anzalone or whatever his name is in that lineup. It's night and day. And he played all but 2 snaps. We were just looking for him to come in for, some occasional plays, and he played all but 2 snaps, and you saw what that defense was like. It's just remarkable.
What you can't teach is anticipation in any sport. I deal with it in tennis. In football, he has that anticipation. So he's in the right spot to make 2 or 3 tackles that the person who played in place of him probably is not in the right spot. So you made a good point with that particular, he made a difference. There's no question. He had the post game. I didn't realize he played all those snaps. So in 2 weeks, he's good to go.
Any tips for the under 40 crowd for Wild Card Weekend? He doesn't understand he's on the Geezer podcast here, right?
It's those years of experience that we will bring to the table today and Thursday with Ted, and we'll talk about these wild card games for sure. Darnold's
you know what? I will say this about the game, though, is I wouldn't say it was unfair, but the Lions played physically, and with a different referee crew, could have been called for defensive, issues. They played those receivers tight, and there was, pulling and grabbing, and but they played it consistent. So, if you're going to be consistent about it, the other thing is that they weren't calling the play clock. I mean, there were a lot of zeros that hit that board, but it went the same way with both teams.
Yeah, so 2 thoughts on that, because that's interesting. Number one is the Lions are going to play physical and probably would be called for some extra penalties because these guys are young back there, and they're doing some things that have to be coached out of them, but they're not going to necessarily be coached out as rookies in that particular situation. And second, maybe because this was a win and in, standalone TV game and so on, we may start seeing a little bit about this. I don't know what your thoughts are on this in the playoffs, where they want to let the players play and not the refs decide it. We may have had a playoff type referee crew decision making in that game.
Yeah, I don't think the league or the fans want to see games decided on ticky-tack fouls and stuff. When you get into playoff hockey and playoff basketball, you let players play for the most part, and that's what we want to see up to a certain degree. We want it to be fair. We don't want.
Players are going to try to get away with whatever they can. If they don't call holding on offense in the first 2 series, you better believe they're going to continue to do that until it's called.
Oh God. Trying to think what else. I think it was officiated about what we would expect. I was surprised a few things were not called. There was. It went both ways, though. I thought there were some possible non-calls on the Lions, but I remember there were some non-calls on Minnesota. I remember early in the game there should have been a roughing or unnecessary roughness against Minnesota when the guy was completely out of bounds and he still got pushed down to the ground. They didn't call that, but that was consistent with the way they called the game, so that's okay.
Yeah, you probably know me that I don't harp too much on, my team got robbed or this and that and so on with the refs and stuff. But the bottom line is whatever way they rep the game, Detroit was a better team that night, even if they got called for 2 or 3 other holding calls. I just thought the game plan for Minnesota will change if they meet again. And what I heard, maybe you heard this too, is that when the coaches met after the game and shook hands, that Dan Campbell said, see you in 2 weeks. So it would be a different game plan. Believe me, and even though you and I profited from Justin Jefferson not catching a lot of balls in that particular game, you better believe Justin Jefferson will be targeted 10 to 12 times the next time the Lions see him.
Yeah, in a rematch, I would anticipate a completely different game. Certainly wouldn't be overly confident that just because the the game Sunday night went as it did, that the next game would go the same. I wouldn't expect it to go the same at all. So, with that in mind, you want to look forward to what's coming up?
Yeah, let's look forward to that. Let's put closure on that and saying this is why we have these discussions. We're already anticipating what a Detroit-Minnesota rematch would look like. And those are the things I think we have to think about. I have to think about. Anybody listening or watching should think about it too. Assume that there's going to be some different styles and try to anticipate what those styles are going to be the next time these teams meet. I think that's very important.
I think the other thing is to remember is the playoffs are not bracketed. They're reseeded every round, correct?
That is correct. Different than the college.
So that can make a big difference. I mean, I think it's kind of fair that the higher seed should always play the lowest seed available, so to speak. But it just makes things kind of odd that you don't have an automatic this team facing that team type of situation.
And we'll have one of those weird situations that people complain about where a 14-3 team goes on the road to play a team with a far weaker record. In Minnesota and the Rams, that's the 6th game, so we'll cover it last. But in terms of that, I have no problems with that. Even the year that Seattle had a losing record and got to host a playoff game. The divisions are tough enough. You have to play 6 games within the division. Everybody knows the rules coming in, so you do what you can.
Yeah, I'd be moaning and groaning if I had to go to Los Angeles if I was a Lions fan. So
yeah, it's not good for the team that's going. That fan base is the most upset. But what can you do? Saturday starts off with the Chargers and the Texans. Fascinating game. I think most of these are fascinating games.
I think that this is, in my lifetime, the very best set of playoff teams I've ever seen. My belief is that I think Washington is the least likely, but there is not a team in the NFC side of the playoffs that can't win 2 games or 3 games in a row and get to the Super Bowl, in my opinion.
So the Rams have the same record as Seattle, but in reality, I think we both would say the Rams are clearly higher power rated and should be higher on your list. I'll put words in your mouth. They're higher in my list than Seattle. I don't think you can argue that the best 7 teams got into the NFC.
I'm sorry. What did you say? I got this joker in the comments.
That I think the Rams and Seattle, they're power rated differently for me. I don't know how differently they are for you, but I have the Rams clearly ahead of Seattle, and I think the best 7 teams in the NFC are in.
That's a good question. No, I didn't get the top 7.
No? Which team are you missing?
I don't have the Rams in the top 7.
So who do you have ahead of them?
Seattle.
Oh, you do have Seattle ahead of them. Okay. Yeah. That would be the only one to consider, but I have the Rams. I didn't give them much credit last week. I have the Rams 2.5 points higher than Seattle. So there's a pretty big playoff gap. And the only gap in the AFC is Cincinnati is missing.
Let's see. I have Pittsburgh doesn't belong in there. Somehow they faded so hard and fast.
Schedule got tougher.
Cincinnati and Miami rated higher than Pittsburgh.
Yeah, me too. Man, I have Cincinnati probably about fourth in the AFC.
But for the most part, I mean, we're just looking at the last entry, so
Yeah,
pretty
it's
good.
a
But
good
yeah,
group. It's a good group.
I think I don't necessarily think the first round games are that exciting for the AFC. You've got some two big spread games that are either going to go one direction or the other. And I think if Baltimore or Buffalo get out to a lead, it's sayonara. But if somehow Pittsburgh and Denver can get out to leads, well, then those games are going to be awfully interesting.
Yeah, so I've started my research, and part of my research is obviously the usual metrics. How did this team stack up against this team? What's been happening lately? Where are the key playoff indicators and stuff? But I also have long-term history of teams with certain profiles, where they belong and where they don't belong. And it would be a shocker if a team like Pittsburgh made the Super Bowl, and they're not going to make the Super Bowl. They're lucky they're playing a team they know well in Baltimore, because otherwise, what we saw from Pittsburgh, and here's something you can research a little bit. Well, you don't even have to research it because you've already pretty much said it. Pittsburgh has folded up a little bit. They had a 70% pass defense when the schedule got rougher. They were exposed when the schedule got rougher, and we knew it was going to get rougher those last 8 weeks of the season with all the divisional games, Kansas City, and one other team I think that they played. It was just a brutal schedule the last 8 games, and they allowed 70% in the final 9 games, actually, if you want to count Washington, of the season. So Pittsburgh got worse.
Well, what was remarkable is, they really should have won that game last week. I mean, what the hell was going on with the dropped balls? I mean, and this happened, oftentimes with Pittsburgh throughout the season, dropped balls. I mean,
Pickens had a terrible game.
Wilson's end of game play, Tomlin's end of game coaching, dropped balls. It's remarkable.
If Pickens has a reasonable game, they could win that game. However, Russell Wilson can't get out of his own way when anticipating the pass rush. I mean, Trey Hendrickson got him 3.5 times. At some point, you've got to do a Bo Nix kind of thing and get the ball out quicker. That's what frustrated Sean Payton in Denver. And I know Arthur Smith, the offensive coordinator, has improved things a little bit in terms of what's going on in Pittsburgh. But the fact that he even gets head coaching, he's up for some head coaching jobs. Apparently, he's going to be interviewed. Arthur Smith is not my idea of a 21st century offensive coordinator. And I think that combination, you can only go so far with Russell Wilson if he's not going to anticipate pressure.
Well, let's start off at the top here. We've got the Chargers at the Texans. This line seems to be surprising a lot of people. Does this surprise you?
I would have made it 1.5. I think the Chargers are getting credit for Harbaugh. I think they're getting credit for the fact that Houston stumbled a little bit down the stretch. But what they shouldn't be getting credit for is that in reality, they're not running the ball all that well. They're kind of one-dimensional with Herbert. I don't know if you've seen that, but he's back. That's wonderful, but he's running at a very low yards per carry. That's going to hurt against a Houston pass defense. That's probably going to slow down Herbert in some way, shape, or form. So I think this game hinges on how you feel Stroud will do against the Chargers.
Do you think Harbaugh, being familiar with Stroud, is any advantage?
Yeah, I think Hector posed that question to me in a different thing. And I think, so I looked back, thanks to Hector, and the last time Harbaugh faced Stroud in college, Stroud threw 2 interceptions had 2 touchdowns, but he also threw for something like 370 yards or something like that. So he threw the ball all over the place. But the thing that I mentioned is that Stroud has been coached up in 2 years to read NFL defenses. He's a different quarterback right now. So in a lot of respects, unless there are some idiosyncrasies about Stroud's game that still appears on tape, I don't think you get too much out of that.
Yeah, I kind of tend to agree. It's apples and oranges at this point. But I think it's a lot easier to get behind the better quarterback and the better coach for people. But I don't think it's you're certainly not getting any value with the Chargers.
You're not getting, in my opinion, value with the Chargers. And you're getting, if you like Houston, you are dealing, actually, if you like either team, you're getting a work in progress. The Chargers are going to look vastly different next year. You watch, they may draft a tight end in the first round that fits Harbaugh's mentality of smash mouth. I mean, there's so many good tight ends that are first round eligible. Even one from his old school Michigan that might be really interesting. They're a work in progress, even though if you compare them to the Staley team of last year, they're so fundamentally better in terms of tackling and stuff like that. Houston's a work in progress too, for the most part. They've had to shuffle through some wide receivers. They've got Joe Mixon, but he's like Dobbins, is not running for a tremendous amount of yards per carry right now, but he'll be a workhorse. And they shuffled a lot of guys on the defense. So they have a lot of first-year starters defensively, again, in D'Amico Ryan's second year coaching. So you're getting 2 teams that are going to be even better, I think, next year than this year.
Yeah, I worry about the Houston play calling. If you're going to be putting Stroud in third and long situations, it's going to be a long day for Houston.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how Herbert does against Houston's pass defense, which is their strength. It's definitely a good pass defense in terms of limiting what Herbert does well. Herbert's so accurate. It's going to be interesting to see how accurate he'll be against Houston. It really does come down to the quarterbacks, what they see and what they're allowed to see. And maybe somebody makes a mistake in the red zone that costs them. But it's an intriguing game. And my first reaction is the same as yours. If you like the Chargers, you're not getting tremendous value there. You really have to think they're just the better team and the better quarterback.
I'll tell you, I would have lost this bet. The Chargers had the better full season offense than the Houston's offense. That blows me away.
Say that one more time. I'm sorry.
The Chargers offense for the full season is rated higher than Houston's offense. How the hell is that possible?
I'm okay with that. Stroud had some ups and downs, and Dobbins was so good at the beginning of the year that if you factor in the full year, Dobbins looks better than he does the last 3 weeks.
Just a big surprise for me. So I really like Houston in a 7-point teaser getting plus 10. I think this game's I can't see the Chargers winning by margin.
I have a question for Tommy. Thanks, Tommy, for being in the chat. And I promise you we'll do a lunch or a breakfast one of these Fridays soon. You said that Houston's defense is regressing, but I have a question for you and others, and that is, I was luckily enough able to correctly predict that they wanted to give Stroud a confidence boost last week, and they got out to the big lead against Tennessee. They looked better against Tennessee. They frustrated both of Tennessee's quarterbacks, and we know Tennessee was trying. We also know Tennessee's not a great team. How much does that confidence boost factor into now Houston feels better and they can be what they were in the middle of the season, and that's confident that they belong in the playoffs?
I've actually got the Chargers defense faring much worse than Houston's over the last 5 weeks.
Yeah, overall, I have Houston's defense better than the Chargers. I'll have to look back to double check the last 5 weeks for me. I think it'll be a close game.
Yeah, I have Houston's defense better than the Chargers for the full season too. I think I have Houston's defense overrated though. Jesus. Where do you
Another
have them?
question for you that probably doesn't come into play as much on a Saturday. I don't know. I'm just speculating. How much is home field advantage worth in the playoffs, Chris?
Oh, I think there's value. I think it's worth more than regular season.
Okay. I tend to agree with a half a point more in most cases. So we go from, I use home field advantage somewhere between 1.25 and 1.75 in the regular season, and between 1.75 and 2.25 in most cases in the postseasons. So we're still never going to get back to that old 3 points for home field. We're never getting there.
Birdie says you're a lunatic.
But going 6 for 6 versus the Titans in a meaningless Week 18 will somehow get is out there. I promise you, leaving with that 7-0 or 14-0 lead gives them confidence. There's just a psychological aspect, and for whatever good or bad my psych major came into play in undergraduate and graduate studies and stuff like that, I do believe that Stroud has confidence, even with the 6 from. I mean, you want to give a good taste in your mouth. Whether that works against the Chargers, I don't know, but I fully believe they're going to go into the game in a much better frame of mind than they did when they entered the Tennessee game.
Well, it's from tennis, and I know from pool and other sports is, if you're going to get into a competition, you kind of like to leave your practice on a high note, even though that practice meant nothing. So I think if you categorize it sort of like that, it's sort of like a mental picture that you can walk away from and feel good about. It doesn't matter that it was versus Helen Keller's School for the Blind or the Tennessee Titans. It's, you want to be able to visualize the last time you were on the field, things were working well. So, and you can build off of that. So,
yeah. And it doesn't guarantee that Houston wins. It just means that if the Chargers are a better team, then the Chargers are a better team. Sometimes you just shake your head and say, yeah, that was the better tennis player, the better pool player, whatever. You don't know. 5.0 versus 5.9. Okay.
Is there only one defensive metric now? I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a big difference, though. But if you narrow yourself down to too few of inputs, then that's opening up a can of worms to be reliant on any couple of statistics.
Yeah.
What do you think?
There's a lot of other stuff going on in this game, like which running back will have more success. I think it'll be Mixon a little bit over the Chargers' run defense. I think Mixon could, not that either of these guys are running wild, but I think Mixon has a little bit more of a chance to achieve some first down success versus Dobbins right now. We'll see what Dobbins is capable of. But that's going to come into play. The sack ratios, which is a metric I use a lot. Houston's got to shore up that pass defense a little bit. Stroud got sacked way too many times. But we're talking 45 or more sacks allowed or sacks gained in this game. The ratio for the Chargers, 46-45. For Houston, 49-54. So neither of these teams did a fantastic job at protecting their quarterback. And both of these teams are capable of getting to the opposing quarterback. So we've got some real chess matches on our hands for this game.
I feel like this game is going to be lucky to get over the total. What do you think?
Yeah, a lot's going to depend on turnovers in this game, because I think there could be some quarterback forced turnovers if they really do. allow these pass rushers to get through. You can't afford that red zone interception that interception in your own field of play that knocks things back. But I generally think it'll be a little bit lower scoring. I think this is like 2017, 23-20 range, which is near the roughly 43 points last I saw it.
What was that?
I think it'll be slightly under the total would be my guess. I'm not going to be playing total, but slightly under.
Yeah, I got spaced out there. Tommy, you got to get the 7-point teaser, though. I know you like your 6-pointers. You got to get that 10. That's about all we have on that game, right?
Yeah, let's go on to Pittsburgh, Baltimore. These teams, they know each other. Geez, what is it now? 400 times Harbaugh and Tomlin have played each other. So they don't have to prep much, which is good because I'm going to tell you that, Chris, the thing I'm looking forward to in this game is not this game in general, but how this game ends and whether the winning team, presumably Baltimore, whether they get out without having to deal with the physicality of a Pittsburgh-Baltimore game. I think this is a bad draw for Baltimore in terms of their overall Super Bowl hopes if they can't win by margin enough so that they don't get into a physical slugfest against Pittsburgh, if that makes sense.
Well, you've got the matchups of head coaches that are going to make errors. So why in the hell were Jackson and Henry in the game late in the fourth quarter? I just, for the life of me, why do you have Henry running the ball with 3 minutes to go in the game?
I agree.
There's no justification for it. None. The stupidity that runs between both of these coaches at times is just remarkable. It's like feast or brilliance or complete imbecilic decisions. And I just, for the life of me, both of these coaches do it from time to time at one extreme or the other. Do we know whether Flowers is going to be in?
He's day-to-day last I saw, and he's an important piece, obviously.
No, I agree with you. I think, as I mentioned, if Pittsburgh gets out to the lead, Baltimore doesn't like to come from behind. They like to be in control, so they can play with their food a little bit or just put people away. I mean, that's the way I feel. But when Baltimore gets behind, they get flustered. And
breaking news. Antonio Pierce out.
Yeah, he was fired 15 minutes ago.
Okay, back to regular programming.
If Pittsburgh gets behind, this game could get really ugly.
Yeah, I would agree with that because then you're setting up. Baltimore had 54 defensive sacks. If Pittsburgh's down by 10, Russell Wilson's a sitting duck.
Yeah. Especially since Pickens is on the take and is dumping in, obviously.
Well, we've known for a while that Pittsburgh is deficient at wide receiver, even when Pickens brings his A game, which is more often than not. He had a bad game last week. We talked about that. But there's no second option. If he has a bad game, their only option is checkdowns to running back Warren or 7-yard passes to a very capable tight end in Freiermuth, but he doesn't stretch the field. So Pittsburgh gets very, very limited. I'd almost say look for Russell Wilson to run for 30 yards in this game if it gets down to that.
David Montgomery is due back next week.
Well, it depends who they play, how much they want to ease him into the lineup if that happens.
What's the total on that? 43.5. You know what? That's a crapshoot. It depends on who gets. If Pittsburgh gets the lead, that'll be an under, and vice versa, right?
Yeah, I mean, they generally like to play games that go under the total. They want to get as physical as possible. Todd Monken in Baltimore has started to open up the playbook a little more and do more stuff with it. If Zay Flowers is out, that might change things. One thing Baltimore has to remember, last year's playoffs, we've talked about it often, feed your running back. Henry gets better the more carries he has. So Baltimore alone could make it into one of those games. Even if Baltimore wins by margin, what if the game ends 34-7?
Yeah, Tommy's got it. It's a good in-game
Yeah.
opportunity.
No, that's true. You got to see how Pittsburgh is faring to beginning. I mean, usually Baltimore starts fast. I mean, how many games does Baltimore not take the lead in? It's just crazy. And then they have their problems, their coaching issues in the second half and stuff. But some of that can start to be mitigated by having Travis Henry in the lineup. So I have stats for you on Travis Henry. In the first game against Pittsburgh, Henry ran 13 for 65. Only 13 carries. They lost 18-16, 5 yards per carry. In the second game against Pittsburgh, Henry ran 24 for 162. 24 carries against Pittsburgh. So you're talking about a guy who ran 5.5 yards per carry. I don't know if teams can stop Henry when he gets rolling.
I couldn't stop him. Jesus.
Yeah, I'd be in the infirmary. But so if you're looking at Pittsburgh, if you want to bet Pittsburgh, what do you hope what's their game plan to come out with a cover or an upset?
We didn't mention it, but Baltimore, we had on the caution list for the first half of the season because of their defense, and we dismissed their ability to really be considered elite because of the defense. But they're near the top over the last 5 weeks. We talked about it for the last couple of weeks, and they finished the year just outside the top 10 for me.
Yeah, I think when I add up the numbers, they'll
they did finish in the top 10.
Yeah, they'll be in the top 10 for me. I think they're going to be closer to the 6 to 8 range, but I haven't run those kinds of numbers yet.
But the important thing is that they've gotten their act together on defense at the right time of year.
So I mentioned the Steelers have been allowing 70% through the air the last 9 games. Lamar Jackson against Cleveland's defense, pass defense being Cleveland's best trait. Lamar Jackson was 16 out of 32 last week, and he was uncomfortable. I don't know if you saw some of that. Lamar Jackson looked uncomfortable against Cleveland's defense, and maybe part of that was Zay Flowers missing. I think Lamar Jackson has to be made to look uncomfortable again for Pittsburgh to have a chance.
Oh, I agree.
Now, can they do it?
Yeah, they can do it.
Okay.
Whether they do or they don't, we'll have to see. I mean, there's just so many fine lines of what you need teams to do. I mean, it changes the whole complexion of the game. If like we mentioned in the previous game, you put Stroud in third and long, that's going to be one type of game. If Pittsburgh or Denver fall behind early, they're in trouble. So you just have to, it depends on where the beginning of the game puts you.
Yeah. I just think offensively, Pittsburgh's going to have to play out of the box a little bit. So what that means for me is that Warren is going to have to be a factor in the pass game, not just the run game. He's going to have to catch 5-6 passes for 35, 40 yards. Russell Wilson is going to have designed quarterback options where he takes off, not because he's being rushed by 5 people, but he takes off on designed, planned rushes. I think they have to think a little bit differently in this game offensively.
I like that idea because you need to make them defend him differently. And it seems like they were kind of protecting him a lot of the season. there were not enough designed runs, and this is where it would really come into handy because that'll be confusing to the defense. It'll open it up a little bit if they know, because he wasn't really looking to run, and the stupidity of his last run in the last game, they might be thinking they're never going to let him run again.
Yeah, I Tommy's approach in game betting and stuff like that, we've got to see what they bring, because if they run into the tooth, if they run right into the middle of the Baltimore run defense, it's like Ohio State running into Michigan's run defense. That's not the way they're going to win the game. They're not going to win the game running it straight forward. Justin Fields, good point, Hector. How about incorporating him into the game plan if you don't want to run Russell Wilson? Although with Justin Fields, when he's in the game, that's part of his arsenal. You could have the element of surprise if you run Russell Wilson on design runs.
Yeah, I agree. Denver and the Bills. How do you see this game?
Well, there's two ways to look at every game, right? Buffalo got a bye week. A lot of teams got a bye week last week, if you look at it. Houston was off for 3 quarters. Kansas City's been off for 3 weeks. Buffalo was off for everything but one snap of the game. Baltimore had to play hard. Philly didn't play, hasn't played. Hurts and all these other guys. The Rams haven't played. So on the one hand, they got the MVP in Josh Allen, who's being a lot more careful with the ball and so on. And on the other hand, you have a Denver team that has some opportunity in this game, because I still feel like the Bills, and I said this, we had some disagreement 4 or 5 weeks ago, but I still think the Bills have one of the worst Super Bowl profile defenses I've seen.
Jesus, are they that low? Really? Wow. They're that would be one of the lowest rated defenses to make a Super Bowl. I'll say that.
Yeah, it would be in the bottom 5 all time. And I know the game has changed a little and it's more offensive and stuff like that, but those metrics, even their amount of defensive sacks is below league average. Their pass defense is well below league average. Their run defense is slightly below league average. Now, we haven't talked offense, which is incredible. Josh Allen was sacked 12 times or something this year, 14 times at the most. I mean, we're talking about an offensive line that did an incredible job protecting Josh Allen.
I just think that that's too many points. I mean, you do have the rookie quarterback, and the game can get out of hand, so to speak. We've seen that before.
I'm gonna give you a stat. You're gonna like this stat. Bo Nix, college and pro, has had 78 starts. Richardson of Indianapolis, college and pro, has had 26 starts. Think about that.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Denver has 63 defensive sacks. Buffalo allows 14. Pretty interesting chess match there.
Well, what do you think happens with that chess match?
I think you get more Josh Allen design runs. I don't think Denver can really get home against Josh Allen. I think Josh Allen is too savvy for that. So I think in general, Denver could get 2 sacks, which would be more than, Buffalo's allowing less than 1 per game. I think Denver's ceiling is 2. So 2 would be double the amount. So I think Josh Allen kind of wins in that situation. So Denver's going to have to do other things to frustrate Josh Allen.
What can Buffalo do defensively? I mean, Denver's a pretty solid team.
Yeah, they have Cortland Sutton. They have a variety of tight ends and wide receivers. It seems like they shuffle them on every play, because it seems like every tight end or wide receiver comes in and brings in it's the old style where somebody brings the play call to the lineup for the next play. So there's no other number 2 guy. They also shuffle 3 running backs around. So it's there's one go-to guy for Denver and a bunch of complementary guys that 1 week somebody gets 4 catches, 1 week he gets 0, and it just ebbs and flows. The number of carries are determined by how well the running back does in the first quarter of games. So Sean Payton is actually a pretty good mastermind at understanding how to do game flow offensively. He did this with New Orleans. He's doing this with Denver. I think he's going to be creative in his game planning.
So if you get the coin flip and you're Denver, do you give the ball to the Bills first?
I would have to know what their tendency is there, but in my opinion, no, I'd rather have the ball first. I don't want to run the risk of getting behind 7-0.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
I mean, Buffalo is one of those teams that scores a lot of points, right? They score over 30, almost 31 a game. I think second in the league, probably to the Lions. So they do a good job. And Denver's okay. They're 25, and they're only allowing about 18 per game. But you don't want Buffalo to get off on that unbelievably great note. If the weather's different, I don't know what the Sunday weather is. If the weather's different and you can force a first possession stop, that's one thing. But if we're having decent weather, I'd probably rather Denver get the ball first if I'm Denver.
Last I heard, there really are no weather situations this week.
Wow. I got pictures from family that they're shoveling snow and taking their dogs out in the middle of a snowstorm.
Well, I could be wrong. I just heard somebody.
But that's today. I mean, 6 days from now, it could be 42 degrees.
What is that total? 47.
Yeah, I think 47 tells me they expect Buffalo to have success offensively.
And Denver.
Yeah, 47 is like a 28-19 type game based on the line, 8.5 or so.
All right. Well, this Green Bay game's got a lot of question marks. Hurts is still in concussion protocol. You would think he'll make it out, but there's still an outside chance he wouldn't.
Well, that would change things for sure. You know, they played. I mean, you can't read anything into these week 1 games, but they played in Rio de Janeiro. Where did they play? Rio de Janeiro or something? Week 1. Yeah. So it's quite meaningless then. New defensive coordinator for Green Bay and stuff like that. But where we are right now, I mean, Philly's defense has been better than advertised. Here's the point I want to make about this game. Nobody likes to run on Philadelphia. Teams average 24 and a half carries versus Philadelphia. It's been a 3-year thing that teams don't run on Philadelphia. If I'm Green Bay, like it or not, I'm running Josh Jacobs 20 times to test them. I think you have to test their run defense.
Yeah, well, you don't want to be one-dimensional, and it's also going to depend on whether they play zone or man coverage on the Green Bay receivers. And you've got Watson out, so that's not going to help.
You have Watson out. You've had I think his name is Jaden Reed. I don't remember correctly his first name, but he was the go-to guy, and I have him with 2.5 catches per game in the last 7 games. He's kind of disappeared. And so if he disappears, who's the go-to guy for Green Bay that they're going to count on?
I'm not sure. I'm kind of worried about Green Bay.
Yeah. Josh Jacobs in the past has been a workhorse running back. I honestly think you have to ride that workhorse. You have to run him. Even if it's not successful, you have to keep running him and use play action against Philly. I don't think you want to pass the ball on Philly's terms in this game. If I'm Green Bay, My game plan, like it or not, has Josh Jacobs running 17 to 24 times.
Well, we know what Philadelphia's MO is. If they get a lead, they're going to churn clock.
Yeah. Barkley's rested. The Smith-Brown combination is great. They got Dallas Goedert back. I can make a big case for Philly. I'm trying to make a case for Green Bay.
Yeah. Well, I think that you're going to see this line jump when you see Hurts practicing again. I mean, you're seeing it tick back up. I think you've seen the bottom unless Hurts is out.
There's kind of a dilemma for me. My power ratings didn't support a line over 3, but my eye test says 3 is cheap.
Yeah, I mean, I show the line's supposed to be over a field goal, but not much.
Yeah, and I show it a soft 3. So the eye test doesn't say it in the matchup analysis. At least my preliminary matchup analysis is not favoring Green Bay.
Yeah, I have. I feel the same way. And as far as that total goes, God only knows.
I'm not touching that.
Washington, Tampa Bay. This is a little bit surprising to me. What about you? Where do you have this line?
I had it at 3. So I don't have any problem with that part. They played week 1 also, but you can't take anything away from that game whatsoever because Washington had a new coach. They had a new culture. They had a new quarterback. Nobody cares about that game whatsoever. I had to do some research here because of, I lost the season win total on Tampa. It's only one of 2 that I lost. So I said, well, how wrong was I on Tampa? And I wasn't that wrong during the season. 2-1 when betting for them, 1-2 when betting against them. So 3-3 overall. And Baker Mayfield's thrown a lot of interceptions. But other than that, Tampa Bay has been really good. What can I say?
Number 1 over the last 5 weeks.
They were 31st, I think, in run offense last year, and they're 2nd or 3rd this year. It's been, a night and day difference. Their offensive line has really been much better. Bucky Irving has been a revelation for them, but even their other 2 running backs have ran decently. So it's more than just the running backs. It's the offensive line. Obviously, Evans is an incredible talent at wide receiver. And McMillan, the rookie, nobody's talking about him, but he catches 5 per game all of a sudden. He's really good.
They still stumbled last week. It seems like they've stumbled a handful of times recently. I'm kind of surprised to see them at the top of the heap over the last 5 weeks.
Are they playing down at all to their competition?
They may very well be.
I want to check that out real quick somewhere. I hope to have that information. I'm trying to think of teams that they were supposed to win. Let's look at teams that they were favored by. How much you want to say? No, they killed Carolina 48-14 the week before, and Carolina was trying. They lost to Dallas outright.
What was the week before?
They lost to Dallas outright on December 22nd as a 4-point road favorite.
Yeah, that was a goofy game.
They beat Vegas by 15 in early December, favored by 6.5. They went to overtime against Carolina when they were favored by 5.5. They belted the Giants, but everybody belts the Giants. Now, they allow a lot of points. Their defense, where do you have their defense?
Actually, not very good.
Yeah, me too. It's kind of C-.
But I've got them and Washington's defense side by side.
Well, here's the thing about Washington. Do you know what their defense has been after week 5? after week 5, Washington has allowed 57% through the air. And I don't know how that escaped me these last few weeks, but Washington is suddenly fundamentally sound defending the pass, which they'll need to be against Baker Mayfield.
Hasn't it been kind of a teeter-totter that they're not doing as well on the run though?
No, yeah, they have not improved at all versus the run. They have remained consistently below average against the run, likely in the bottom, let's say 5 to 6 against the run. So that area, you are absolutely correct. And they're league average at best sacking, but it's their defending the pass that has suddenly made them. I mean, who had them with 11 wins to start the year?
Well, I told you they were the best team in that division if it wasn't New Orleans.
No, I mean Washington, who had them at 11 wins.
Oh,
yeah.
Have you looked at these first half versus second half EPA metrics for Tampa that Justin brought up?
No, let's see. Let me put them down the stretch. Have been striking to see. So they have underperformed in the first half. I'm guessing, is that, Justin? Is that what you mean? Because they had they had a shaky first half last week.
It feels like they've been shaky in the first halves.
Yeah, bad in first half. Okay, I think that speaks to two things. One is that Tampa isn't really that good a team, and two, that Baker Mayfield will have you in a game no matter what the situation. Maybe it's one of those things that, as we're brainstorming this, that if Tampa gets behind, don't count them out. And if Tampa gets far ahead, maybe the gap gets closed because their defense isn't good enough. Maybe it's something to look at in terms of whoever gets ahead, they don't have the ability to seal the game off. Just a thought.
I don't think either of these teams have the ability to close out the other team. That's what I was kind of surprised to see the 3.5s pop up yesterday.
Yeah, I have two schools of thought on this game. Washington is not at all a Super Bowl contender. They have metrics they have weird metrics. Them and Denver have weird metrics. Over the course of history, teams like Denver and Washington will perform well in the first round of a playoff game and tank completely in the second round of the playoffs. So basically what I'm saying is that even if Washington wins this week, that I would fade them the next week.
Do we have a history? I refresh my memory. Are these wild card rounds blowouts?
It varies from year to year. 2 or 3 years ago, every game seemed to go to overtime or the last possession. The AFC was especially incredibly wild with those Cincinnati, Buffalo, Kansas City. Those games came down to, you could have flipped a coin. They were 50-50 games. Those weren't first round games necessarily, but I think one of them was because Cincinnati was involved and it was a coin flip game. So I don't know how to read it, especially now that the NFL has gone to Monday games. It really changes some dynamics. It's hard to use past history sometimes. I think I have to be careful when you start looking at, well, now teams have 2 days rest, or your rest differential comes into play in a playoff. It's crazy. And load management.
Yeah, I don't like this 3-day stuff.
Yeah.
Where does that put that would put Minnesota at a disadvantage?
Yeah, that means if Minnesota wins, they could be going to Detroit on a very short, on the Sunday afternoon game.
Well, speaking of Minnesota and the Rams, we talked about that yesterday. I'm kind of surprised that Minnesota is remaining the favorite, but
yeah, according to my power numbers, it doesn't add up that Minnesota is the favorite. Now, I think it's Vegas saying that don't read into too much of what happened with Minnesota and what happened with the Rams. But even if they're saying that, my power ratings do not support Minnesota being the favorite.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That was a boring statement, huh? But, I think you're going to see a different Minnesota team. Now, we do have history in this one. Minnesota went to the Rams in October and lost 30-20. Same thing, 2.5-point favorite. The Rams were just getting hot at that time. They got Puka back for the very first game, and they got Justin Jefferson back for the very first time. I'm not Justin Jefferson, Puka and Cooper Kupp. Both of them played. First time they had played.
Well, that was, and Flores is quoted as that they got caught with their pants off because Nakua playing just was a complete and utter surprise, and they did not prep in the least for that.
I remember us talking about it on the show and saying, how the hell did Puka just come out of nowhere and and what was he, 7 for 120 or something like that? That came out of nowhere after not playing.
Yeah, well, that cost me because if I had known that would have expected something different. So it was not a fun result.
Fun for me. I did have the Rams in that particular game as a power play. Well, Darnold in that game was good. 18 of 25, 240 yards, 2-0 ratio. Justin Jefferson, 8 catches, 115 yards. I definitely think they understand that you have to get the ball to your best playmaker, and Justin Jefferson will be a live target in this game.
So where do you, out of all these games, what would do you have any inclination in this game?
Yeah, well, I did 2 things, and I mean, I can't ignore my power ratings, so I have the Rams. Whether it's the right side, I don't know, but power rating dogs have historically stood up. And the idea that I had to I kind of do my 2-for-1 kind of thing, took the Rams on the money line and took the Rams +3, laying some juice.
Where do you feel this line closes?
I think Minnie stays the favorite when all is said and done because of the Justin Jefferson factor. I think they stay in the 1.5 range. If they suddenly somehow went way back up, they can't possibly get back to a soft 3 or, even a hard. I think the line can't be anything more than 2.5 minus 110, but I think it closes 1.5 as a guess. You got thoughts on that? I mean, my numbers say the Rams should close at 1.
I mean, Johnny Avella was interviewed last night. He thought the line would come down to pick. I thought the line would come down to pick. I don't see.
Yeah. Good point by Chris Hunter that I didn't bring up. That's why we love our audience, Chris. That game was a Thursday game. The Vikings were operating under a short week, and the Rams had been home the previous week. So they were already there. They didn't have to fly in and fly back and stuff like that. So there were advantages the Rams had in that Thursday game that maybe they don't have in this game. Although, again, Minnie played Sunday night. But, this is Monday. I think there's no rest differential advantage other than the fact that Stafford rested. Kieran Williams, who's going to carry the ball a number of times, rested. Puka rested. Kupp has to be part of the game plan. Believe it or not, Cooper Kupp has disappeared the last few weeks.
Yeah, he has. Wasn't he out?
No, he's played. But
I'm thinking of the other one.
But he's had meaningless stats. I think they're going to throw to him. They have to throw to him. I think you got to in playoff games of this stature, you have to use your stars.
It feels like they get over that total, though.
That I would probably agree with. Let's see. The last game was 30-20, so that was 50 points.
Was it 30-20?
Yeah. Vikings lost 30-20 as a 2.5-point favorite. And that's on a Thursday. Sometimes you don't get that many points on the Thursday, depending on matchups.
That's about all I have. I'm not feeling
I think
great.
we did all we could do today. I thought we did a great job of brainstorming. Week 18 is behind us. I'm telling you, that was a fantastic week, but it's meaningless. We're all in the playoffs. It's one and done for handicappers, and it's one and done for these teams as well. Looking forward to this weekend. We'll talk. I think Ted has some interviews, right, for Thursday.
Okay. I haven't heard who, but it's always a nice surprise.
Probably, let's see, who is at home last week? Rams were at home, I think, right? Rams were at home, so he probably has some Ram talk. So look for some of the LA Rams to talk about this. It'll be interesting to see if he got anything about what happened last time versus what happened this time. If I could go back in the time machine, I'd say ask Cooper Kupp what's been going on with him lately.
Yeah, I think he went to Seahawks Rams.
Yeah. So we'll have that. We'll talk more on Thursday. You'll talk on Wednesday with the Bet US guys, and we'll be back at it Wild Card Weekend.
All right, that sounds good. I'm just not feeling well today, so I'm going to cut this short and hopefully be more energetic on tomorrow on Bet US and with you guys on Thursday.
See everybody later.
Thanks.